Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Thursday, May the 23rd, 2024. There is a lot going on today. We've got a full moon, we've got Venus going into Gemini, and we have got a conjunction between Venus and Jupiter. And this Venus-Jupiter conjunction is going to be my theme in this video, and I'm going to be considering what the Venus-Jupiter conjunction might mean, and I'm going to be looking at some horoscopes of people who do have this conjunction. In fact, the United States has a conjunction between Venus and Jupiter, and also the people on this on the thumbnail of this video. Robert Oppenheimer had it, and so does Roman Polanski and Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran. So I'll be looking at their charts and other charts of people who have this conjunction between Venus and Jupiter. But first, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Thursday, May the 23rd, 2024. So what we have here is the chart for today, and we can see that the moon is now in Sagittarius. The moon went into Sagittarius at 9:24 a.m. London time. So if you're in Europe, for most of the day, you've got moon in Sagittarius. If you're in New York, the moon would have gone into Sagittarius at 4:24 a.m. In Los Angeles, 1:24 a.m. So from the American perspective, you can regard today as having moon in Sagittarius completely. Now, if you're in Australia and New Zealand, the moon will not go into Sagittarius until this evening. So to an extent it depends where you are, but I would have said from a perspective of Europe and the Americas, you can probably regard it being being a moon in Sagittarius day. I suppose in Europe it depends to an extent what time you get up. I suppose if you're an early riser in Paris or Berlin, then the moon doesn't go into Sagittarius until 10:24 a.m. And so the beginning of the day, you're going to have the moon in late Scorpio. So that's one thing going on. I think the moon moving from Scorpio to Sagittarius is a good thing. I mean, the moon has problems in Scorpio. It can be about holding things back, and the moon is fallen there. I mean, the moon is exalted in Taurus. That means it's fallen in Scorpio. So with the moon in Sagittarius, we might feel a certain sense of relief that things are finally starting to move. And I think overall that is going to be an important theme for today, that things are moving, and we can perhaps afford to be a little bit bolder, and we can say what's on our mind, and actually things might be more interesting. And there are other things going on. Venus makes a conjunction to Jupiter. Theoretically, Venus conjunct Jupiter is the most fortunate aspect in the book. I mean, it has to be, doesn't it? I mean, Venus and Jupiter are the benefics. Jupiter is the greater benefic, Venus is the lesser benefic. You put them together in a conjunction being the most powerful aspect of them all, and we get a double dose of good fortune. And I'm hoping that that can say something about today. It can be a fortunate day when things start moving, and perhaps we have more luck than average. Though while this Venus-Jupiter conjunction is operational, we have a full moon. Moon in Sagittarius is opposition the Sun. Now, that does perhaps complicate the picture. Full moons are perhaps less fortunate for new moons. The full moon represents the transition point from the moon is waxing to waning. The waxing part of the cycle tends to be more fortunate than the waning part of the cycle. And so with that full moon, there can be a sense that we can see the truth for what it is, for better or for worse. And maybe it depends how we handle the full moon. We are seeing the truth, and armed with the truth, we can create some changes, because that full moon is tied up with Pluto, because you've got moon in Sagittarius is sextile Pluto in Aquarius, and sun in Gemini is trine Pluto in Aquarius. So Pluto makes a fortunate sextile and trine to that full moon. So if we do feel a little bit under pressure with that full moon, when we see the truth, when we see things for what they're really like, we might be a little bit disturbed by it. But Pluto gives us the capacity to create real change. And so I think that this full moon needn't be too bad on an individual level. I think on a broader collective level, there are wider issues with this full moon. But I don't really want to go into that. I think at a day-to-day level, in terms of what is happening today on Thursday, I think that full moon should be okay. And another thing going on is that Venus is moving into Gemini. Now, not all of us are going to feel that, because it happens at 9:30 in the evening in London. So from a non-European perspective, it either happens very late in the day or indeed happens tomorrow. And maybe I'll be talking in more detail about Venus in Gemini tomorrow on Friday. If you're in the Americas, then Venus in Gemini during the last part of the day. But Venus in Gemini is good. And the reason Venus in Gemini, I think, is good is because Venus will move into mutual reception with Mercury. So Venus moving into Gemini is in Mercury's sign, and Gemini is in Taurus, which is Venus's sign. So that might be something that might really help move things on, and it might be good for relationships. But there are other complications with Venus moving into Gemini, which I will discuss. And maybe this Venus in Gemini is not something we really have to worry about today. Turning to the heliocentric picture, this is the position of the planets today heliocentrically, which is probably not going to be quite as dramatic as the geocentric view, because geocentrically there's a load of stuff going on. Heliocentrically, we've got Mercury at 28 Aquarius, making a trine to Jupiter, and that's probably the main thing happening heliocentrically. And with that trine between Mercury and Jupiter heliocentrically, I think we might feel the struggle to communicate. We've got lots to say. The world has lots to say. There's lots that the world is trying to say. But it can also be about news and realizations, remembering that this is a heliocentric chart, which is sort of more impersonal than a geocentric chart. And so with that Mercury trine Jupiter, it's like the world is trying to understand something. And it's not entirely easy. And there is a possibility with Mercury square Jupiter that we might jump to conclusions. So perhaps we have to be a little careful in that department. And that's really all I want to say about the heliocentric picture. And I now want to transition to the 12 signs and do my forecasts. So let me switch the coordinate system, and that's back to the geocentric picture. And these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Thursday, May the 23rd, 2024. Aries, you feel that things are moving. You know, for the last couple of days, you perhaps haven't been yourself, and you may have been having sort of powerful thoughts and feelings about the world and what's going on in the world. And although you have been in a strong position, you perhaps haven't felt that it was really time to really apply yourself. But with the moon moving into with the moon moving into Sagittarius, things are changing. You're feeling that you have more energy at your disposal, and you're trying to reach out to things that are beyond yourself. You know, that is very important to you. I think maybe recently things have got a little bit stuck and a little bit boring, and now you want to turn over a new leaf. And I think you can turn over a new leaf, but you have to make sure, Aries, that you don't ask too many questions. Sure, you've got to ask a few questions. You don't want to be in a position of ignorance, but if you go over the top in terms of asking questions, you might get nothing done. And so maybe, Aries, you have to take a break from questions. You know, there's a limit. You know, you can only understand things to a certain level, and the facts are great, but if you spend too much time worrying about facts, you'll just never get anywhere. So you may have to make a decision that, you know, you've seen enough, you've heard enough. It's now you're now ready to actually do something. And I think there are certainly things you can do. And I think in many ways, Aries, you can be back to your normal, dramatic, assertive self. And I'm fairly confident, Aries, that you can make things happen. For example, when dealing with other people, you're going to have your spark back, and people will find you exciting, and I think in many cases they'll be quite happy to follow your lead. But Aries, you don't have to do everything on your own. You can certainly benefit from other people. After all, there is a conjunction between Venus and Jupiter. And Venus, of course, has a special connection with other people and relationships in the Aries horoscope. After all, Venus does rule Libra, which is your opposite sign. And with that Venus conjunct Jupiter, you can benefit from someone else, and it may be someone else's good luck can rub off on you. And don't be afraid of getting a little bit of advice or support from another person. Okay, I understand that you can't ask too many questions, but there is someone who's got something useful to say, and it may actually have a relationship to money. There may be someone who can help you financially, or who can give you good advice financially, and if you listen to what they're saying, then you may be really in a position to benefit. But don't push people too hard into making decisions. Yeah, I understand that you are more assertive than you were yesterday, and you might feel that you want to push people into giving you a clear decision or being more decisive. But you have to give people a little more time. You know, some people are on the cusp of something. They're trying to move from one place to another, but they're not quite ready. And so it's probably important that you give people a little more time. And that's especially the case in terms of one-to-one relationships, you know, regardless of what the relationship is all about. So think of the key people in your life, and if they are, you know, holding back on something and you're impatient, don't push them, because soon enough they'll be ready to be more decisive. Taurus. Things should be good today. After all, Venus is making a conjunction to Jupiter. Venus is your ruler. Jupiter is the planet of good fortune. And this conjunction between Venus and Jupiter takes place in your sign. So we've got Venus-Jupiter conjunction in the last degree of Taurus. And it may be important that it is the last degree of Taurus. This kind of good fortune may require prompt action on your part. You may be dealing with a situation where you've waited a long time to take advantage of something, and the opportunity may be at its peak. If you were to wait until tomorrow or next week, you might have missed your chance. So, Taurus, you know, I would urge you to have a really active day, even if you don't feel like it. And I think there are reasons to think you might not feel like it. But whatever you feel, really try to be there. You have to be in a position where you can take advantage of everything on offer. And you cannot assume that, you know, just because I say that things are good because Venus is conjunct Jupiter, that everything is going to be fine. Because, you know, if you stay in bed all day, then how are you going to take advantage of it? Okay, you could. Sometimes it is true that good luck just just manifests out of nowhere as an apparition. I don't know, coming out of the ceiling or wherever. It can happen, I suppose, but it's unlikely to happen. So you do have to be very active today. And as I said, I understand that might be difficult. And so, so if you can do things, that would be really good. If you wait, as I said, it could be a majorly missed opportunity. So why might you not want to do anything today? Why might you want to hold back? Well, the reason you might want to hold back could be because the moon has gone into Sagittarius. Now, Sagittarius is a very different sign to Taurus, you know, all things being equal. Sagittarius is a positive sign. It's a fire sign. It's a mutable sign. In a way, it's everything that Taurus is not. And with the moon going into Sagittarius, you may feel a little bit introspective. You might take the view that things are complicated. And because they're complicated, you don't really want to engage with them. Or you might think that there's something you need to do on your own which can't be discussed with others. Now, it is possible that your own solitary activities, particularly if they have a financial nature, could actually be the source of good luck. So if you are ready to sort of go into the details of something and really understand the things from a sort of nuts and bolts level, get your hands dirty with financial figures and spreadsheets and whatever, maybe you'll find your luck. That is possible, but luck has many forms, and I think if you were to spend all day just focusing on yourself and how complicated things are, then I think your focus might be in the wrong place, and you might miss an important opportunity. But I'm not saying that you shouldn't be serious. So you have to be kind of serious and optimistic and proactive at the same time. And that full moon does link up with Pluto. So you've got moon is sextile Pluto, and that full moon, the full moon, because don't forget what you've got here is you've got moon in Sagittarius, opposition the sun in Gemini. That moon is in an aspect, is in a part of your chart which is often connected with complicated finance, and overall that full moon could have a financial dimension. And with that sextile to Pluto, that may indicate that you can discover important financial things, or it could be psychological. You might have real insights into the psychology of some of the people around you. Perhaps if you're working, people you have to work with, your employers, workmates, employees, people you have to deal with in society, you will start to have an understanding of what makes them tick. And with this understanding, you actually should have the confidence to be able to go out into the world and just see what's on offer. So perhaps it all links up with this sense in which today can be lucky, in which things can go your way at many different levels. You don't have to be a wild extrovert. I'm not saying you need to do that to find the luck. You just have to be there, and you have to be just thinking and interacting, and you need to have your eyes wide open. And with that approach, I think that you really are going to be able to benefit from today. So yes, it's a complicated day, and I think it has to be a busy day. Do as much as possible within your own limits. I understand that there are limits to how much energy you've got, but Jupiter is about to move. Jupiter's about to leave your sign. Jupiter in Taurus is it only happens once every 12 years, and that Venus conjunct Jupiter is really emphasizing Venus in Taurus. And it's Venus, which is these two planets, Venus and Jupiter, these incredibly fortunate planets. They're coming together, and so I suppose I should say, really, you've got your work cut out, and you need to be operating on many different levels today, and just see what you can squeeze out of the day, and do your best, and then, well, that's really all you can do. Gemini, there is a full moon today, and this full moon is across the main axis of your chart, and I would guess this full moon is going to be important for you, especially if you've got a birthday. If you've got a birthday in, say between now and if you had a birthday from say May the 20th through to say May the 26th, 27th, I think this full moon could be particularly important to you. But I think all Geminis are going to be feeling this full moon. And remember, I'm a Gemini, so I'm going to be feeling it as well. Although not directly, I don't think, and not in a birthday kind of way, because my birthday's on May the 30th, so it's going to miss me a little bit. So it's not a major issue for me, but it's still a full moon, and with the full moon, across the main axis of our charts, there is going to be a strong sense of realization and an understanding of the way things are going. And this full moon could be of particular relevance to relationships, because the moon is in Sagittarius, which is the opposite sign to Gemini. And so this full moon allows us to understand people like never before. We can understand what makes them tick, and we see the truth. And that truth can work both ways. When you hear the sort of the phrase seeing the truth about the matter, there's often a sort of a negative view of that, but it works both ways. You can understand the truth that someone is a wonderful person, for example. You can also understand the truth that they're a monster. It's possible, but I suppose normally the real truth is somewhere in between. And once we understand the truth about someone, and there is often that Gemini moment, when you've been thinking, and suddenly you get it. And that might be what happens today. And once you understand the truth, you're in a position to take action. And in terms of relationships, that might mean that you decide that someone is important to you and they need to be maybe a permanent part of your life. Or you might realize that someone really is ghastly, or that things have reached their limit. You might like someone, but a relationship has gone on for too long, and it's time to say goodbye. So that is one possibility. Though when I'm talking about relationships, in this kind of dramatic way, I must emphasize that I'm probably talking about shorter-term relationships. I don't think I'm talking about long-term relationships, someone you've been in a relationship for years, because a relationship with someone that's lasted for years will have survived many of these kinds of full moon. This full moon, it's the Sagittarius full moon that happens once a year, but it's not super rare. And I suppose in a 40-year marriage, you'll get at least 40 of these full moons and you'll survive them. So I don't want to be over dramatic about this full moon. And it may not just be about relationships, it may just be about life in general, having realizations which I think could be quite useful. And this full moon also is hit by Pluto. Remember, yesterday I mentioned that the Sun was making a trine to Pluto. That trine between the Sun and Pluto is still very much operational, and Pluto picks up on the full moon, because we've got Moon sextile Pluto, and it may be that we have the capacity to transform a relationship, or to transform the way we deal with another person. And perhaps if we're involved with someone, we can start to see the relationship in a different way. And through something we do, through some simple action, we can change it, and we can turn a relationship that perhaps wasn't working and wasn't going anywhere into something that could be very useful. So do bear that in mind. And with other people, Gemini, you are actually able to bring to bear quite considerable force. And if you want to have an impact, if you can act without warning, obviously you've got to act in the right way, but something you do without warning can change the terms of a relationship, I think, in your favor. Cancer. There is a full moon today, and full moons are important for Cancerians. The moon is your ruler, and Cancerians tend to be very sensitive to the lunar cycle. And with this full moon, you may actually feel a little bit fragile. It's going to be a day when you're going to be very aware of what's happening in the world and what the world is bringing in and what it's taking out, and the sort of subtle trends and vibes that people are giving off, and it could all be a bit overwhelming. And I think, your main priority is probably going to be to look after yourself. I mean, I think that's what your main priority should be. And you don't want to overdo it. I think that today, Cancer, because of your sensitivity to this full moon, you may not have as much energy as you'd like to have. And there are probably going to be limits to what you can achieve. And so I would sort of ration your energy very carefully and not use your energy in ways that are unnecessary or are trivial and or things that can be done later. Just concentrate on what matters. And with this full moon, I think you're going to start to see certain aspects of your life which are maybe not in good order, or at least could be in better order. And so the full moon will shine light on this, and it will allow you to make a few changes. These are changes that you need to put into action in your own way. They're not changes that you have to advertise. In fact, the less you advertise these changes, I think the better for everyone. But most importantly, it's best for yourself. And it may also have something to do with your health. So when you look at where you are living and functioning, it may occur to you that some aspects of your life and what you're consuming, what you're breathing in, indeed what you're picking up from other people, may be undermining you a little. But I don't want to be overdramatic about this. I'm talking about health in a general sense. I'm talking about health in a sort of lifestyle way. I'm not making any claims about making any medical diagnoses here. So there are small things you can do to your routine which can make you feel better. And so perhaps you need to ask yourself, what might be undermining your health? What is no good? What is exhausting you? And I think there may actually be a moment of truth with that full moon, when it just occurs to you, hold on, you've been doing this for a long time, and this actually is no good. It is undermining you. And with that realization, you may be able to take action. So it could be a bad habit. I mean, it could be, it could be smoking, drinking, or it could be a bad habit of inertia, like not taking enough exercise. Something trivial and easy to fix. And consider your diet. You don't have to spend ages looking at your diet. Maybe you've been thinking about your diet recently, or maybe you'll start thinking about your diet. And when you look at what you're eating, what you're consuming every day, maybe there are some changes, small changes, but changes that could make a big difference. Though again, I'm not making any medical diagnoses here. I'm talking about this in a very general, lifestyle-orientated kind of way. And at the same time as this full moon is going to be linked up with Venus and Jupiter. Now, that might not seem immediately obvious because the moon is in Sagittarius and Venus and Jupiter, the Venus-Jupiter conjunction is in Taurus. But at the beginning of the day, particularly if you're in Asia, Australia, New Zealand, the moon is going to make an opposition to Venus and Jupiter. So that actually happened just before the full moon. And with that opposition to Venus and Jupiter, there may be a sense of something that could work out really well for you. You just pick up on it. It happens actually when the moon is in very late Scorpio, before it goes into Sagittarius. And as I said, this is more if you're east rather than west, but you pick up on this, and you're going to have the moon opposition to Venus-Jupiter midpoint, and I think that just may be a passing realization that there is an opportunity. If you are in the Americas, in Europe, it may be about a dream. So if you try and remember your dream, what you had last night, what you were thinking about experiencing last night or whatever in your dream, the last dream you remember. Sometimes you have a dream and it takes a couple of days before you remember it, just turns up. But that dream may be a pointer to the future with moon opposition Venus-Jupiter. It's a possibility. But I think I don't want to say any more, Cancer. I think the key point today is that you are in control and that you do understand that you have limited amounts of energy, and that you can also make some changes in terms of lifestyle to make yourself happier and healthier. Leo, there is a conjunction between Venus and Jupiter today, and I think this conjunction could actually be quite important for you, because this Venus-Jupiter conjunction happens in Taurus, and Taurus is an important sign for you, because it's very high profile. It's about your direction in life, and Jupiter has been moving through Taurus for a long time, for I think over a year, and it's now conjuncting Venus-Jupiter. It's like this is the peak, just before Jupiter leaves the sign. Because remember, Jupiter leaves Taurus, I think on Sunday, Saturday, Sunday, depends on your time zone. And so you have a chance here to really bring things together. And you may understand what the last year was all about. And this conjunction between Venus and Jupiter can really bring it all together. And it may give you a powerful sense of what you can do. And it's therefore going to be important, Leo, that you're not lazy. Especially, if you have a job or you have a business. Really concentrate on taking advantage of everything, and don't assume that nothing is available. Things are available, and so today really try to focus on that, because if you leave it till next week, there may be the sense that you've missed an opportunity, and maybe if you've got your own business, maybe there's a contract or a piece of work that's available for you. If you're looking for a job, then I know it's nearly the end of a week, but the week there's still Thursday and Friday. So if you're looking for a job, do make a special effort over the next couple of days, because you might be able to make the right connection with that Venus conjunct Jupiter. And of course, it's not just looking for a job. It depends. It might be looking for a piece of business. But really try to make the most of that conjunction between Venus and Jupiter. Also today, we have a full moon, and that full moon may highlight the contrast between the things that you want to do and the things that other people want you to do. And I'm thinking maybe not so much in terms of work, or more about perhaps your social life and the pressures on you to conform. And yes, there are pressures on you to conform, but at the same time, you've got things that you can do which are very much about yourself and about your own individual creativity. And this full moon may highlight a certain clash between the two. And you may feel that you and other people are looking at things from a different perspective, and that other people are actually in your way if you think about it. You know, how can you be yourself when you're surrounded by other people? Yet, at some level, you want to be surrounded by other people. So it's a really difficult thing. But I think the key point to remember is that the Sun is making a trine to Pluto. Now, that trine to Pluto was yesterday, the exact trine, but it's still in operation today. So with that trine between the Sun and Pluto, you can perhaps make some changes. And I think it's about being strong and being very clear about who you are and what you want. And this is perhaps how you can resolve the conflict of a full moon. Yes, at first sight, other people do seem a problem. They do seem to be rather negative in terms of how they impact you and what you want to do, and how they impact your creativity. But you can kind of transform the situation around, and you perhaps have an opportunity to concentrate on people who are supportive. And there are people who are supportive of what you want to do, but there are other people who are not supportive, and people who don't support you, don't appreciate you, don't give you the praise you deserve. Well, you don't have to interact with them. You can distance yourself from them, and perhaps that is fundamentally what this full moon is about. Understanding who your supporters are. Some people wish you well, and they are really focused on you making the most of who you are. But there are other people who perhaps they just objectify you. They just regard you as just being just there. They don't treat you as being an individual. Well, such people, you don't need them. At least right now, you don't need them. And so perhaps that's the way forward for you in terms of this full moon. Virgo, full moon. Full moon is going to be important for a lot of the signs, and I have been talking about this full moon in detail, I think. And this full moon does have an impact on you, and it's important, Virgo, that you're able to negotiate this full moon in the right way, because this full moon it falls across quite an important axis of your chart. So what we have is that we have got the Sun in Gemini, and that is a time, every year Sun goes into Gemini. It's a high profile sign from a Virgo perspective. It is a time of year when Virgos can be very successful, when they can push forward with their agenda, and also they have the flexibility to deal with ongoing challenges, and they can duck and dive and find a way through. But the full moon it does remind you that you can't be ambitious for the sake of ambition. That's not going to work. The full moon reminds you that you have to consider, your grounding. You have to be grounded. Because if you're just moving in one direction and not thinking about where you're coming from, then there's a possibility you'll get lost. And that's perhaps a problem with ambition for the sake of ambition. You keep moving. I don't know, like a stray dog. The dog just keeps moving, keeps running around here, there, and everywhere, and then suddenly it doesn't know where it is. And I suppose there is some possibility there. And perhaps this full moon makes you stop and realize that your security is important. It's that, for example, your family might be important. You have to get the balance maybe between family and career, if that's appropriate for you. That the family-career axis needs to be considered. Though I should say that this full moon may also be about family, and it could be about parental issues. In certain cases, because from a Virgo perspective, you could say that the Sagittarius is about the father and Gemini is about the mother. We could say that. So for a few Virgos, parental issues may be important. Particularly if your parents are still alive, or even if they're not still alive, you may be thinking about, you may be going back to the past and thinking about how your parents related to each other and how that impacted you. And, with this full moon, we could see a sense of the truth. The truth can suddenly happen. It does happen. You can, after your parents have died, and their relationship has an impact on you, and then suddenly it hits you, and it can be quite dramatic when it hits you. And perhaps with the full moon, if you give yourself the time, you might be hit by that. I'm sorry, that was a bit of a deviation. I was trying to talk about getting the balance between home and career right, and still the parental issue can actually have a relationship with that. But still, do try to get that balance right, because if you want to be successful, not just in terms of career, but whatever you're trying to do, whatever your number one thing that you're really working on, whatever it is, if you want to be successful, you've got to make sure that your grounding is all in order. That you're not, standing on a bog or on quicksand. You've got to make sure that you're on firm ground, and understanding the importance of home and family is going to be important, not just for home and family, but also for your ambitions. And so I think that's the main theme for today. I think this full moon does need to be taken seriously, and there may be moments of truth about the past and the future, so take those on board. Libra. There is a conjunction between Venus and Jupiter, and Venus rules Libra. And I think that this Venus-Jupiter conjunction could be very fortunate, provided it is handled in the right way. This Venus-Jupiter conjunction is in Taurus, and you are in a process of change at the moment. I think that you have possibly been thinking a lot more deeply than usual, over the last few weeks, and you perhaps haven't been a typical Libran, and you've maybe been a little bit wary of the world, and You might have been concerned that if you were to take things too far too fast, things might go wrong, that you might get out of your depth. And it's absolutely reasonable to have such a cautious approach. But with this Venus-Jupiter conjunction, I do get the sense in which you could really be able to benefit from something perhaps that's unexpected, something that is not immediately obvious. You benefit from something that may be partially hidden, that other people just don't see. But because you're in a fairly introspective mood, I think you're still in an introspective mood, even though the sun has gone into Gemini, you're still quite introspective today, and that may be a good thing. I think that Libra, there has been deeper thinking than usual, and because of your deep thoughts, you're able to understand what's going on, and you're also able to understand where the opportunities lie. And this also links perhaps with the full moon, because there is this full moon today, and this full moon is pointing you in a new direction. It's reminding you that you don't have to be satisfied with what's in front of you. That you have. I know you've been introspective recently, and that you have been thinking more deeply about things. But you're now starting to think about things from perhaps a broader context, and it seems that you may be too inclined to look at things in terms of broad concepts, and you maybe have to ask a few questions and be ready maybe to embarrass yourself. You might think that you shouldn't ask a question because you might sound stupid if you ask this question. But who cares? I mean, it's better to know something than to be ignorant. And it may be the price of knowledge is a bit of embarrassment, or at least perceived embarrassment. I mean, very often if you ask a simple question, the person you're asking this question, the person you're addressing this question to, is not going to look down upon you for asking this question, because you are giving yourself important information which is going to inform you as you try to work out what your next step is. And Venus, which is your ruler, of course, is actually about to change sign. It's about to move into Gemini. And I'm going to be talking more about this probably tomorrow. But with Venus moving into Gemini, it is a change. And many Librans may feel themselves to be on the cusp of some kind of change. And if you are getting ready for a change, you need to be fully informed. And that goes back to the question of questions. You need to know as much as possible. And this full moon is there to inform you. And that means getting the information you need, the information you need. And you must not be afraid to ask questions. Your questions will receive an answer, and what the other person thinks of you is completely beside the point. The most important thing today is getting good information and informing yourself, and getting the knowledge you need to be successful and accomplished. Scorpio. Moon is leaving your sign, and it is going to create a bit of a change. there may be some advantages of the moon leaving Scorpio. When the moon leaves Scorpio, you're perhaps going to be a little less focused on yourself. Maybe. You won't be picking up so much emotional information from the outside world, which I suppose could be overwhelming. But when the moon leaves Scorpio, it becomes full. In other words, the moon, having left Scorpio, moves into Sagittarius. You get an opposition between the moon and the sun. And with this full moon, which is by definition an opposition between the sun and the moon, there are insights. And some of these insights may actually be financial, because this full moon does fall on across the finance axis of your chart. So in terms of your finances and other people's finances, it is a time where you may actually start to see the truth of the matter, for better or for worse. And I think if you look hard enough, you may realize that some things financially are not in great condition and perhaps need to be changed in a low profile kind of way. We're not talking about dramatic changes, but perhaps you're going to have an awareness about your own financial behavior and your own spending. Perhaps you've been spending too much on one particular thing and you realize this has got to stop. Or you might realize that someone else has been spending too much. Or there may be something deeper and more complicated. It may occur to you that a financial arrangement is not working out, and that this financial arrangement needs to be changed. And this can also apply to business and career, if that's relevant to you. Obviously, every business needs to consider the financial dimension, and it may be that if you're involved in the financial side of things, or if you're involved in terms of your own business, you may realize that something is not quite right, and something needs to be changed. And you might not feel that it's your responsibility, but if you notice something, it becomes your responsibility. And so perhaps it's a time where you have to be honest about how you perceive, not just your own finances, but someone else's finances or an organization's finances. So don't shy away from financial issues today, because I do think that they're important. At the same time as this, there is a conjunction between Venus and Jupiter, and this Venus-Jupiter conjunction is taking place in Taurus, which is your opposite sign, and Venus rules Taurus, so Venus is quite strong in Taurus, and that Venus-Jupiter conjunction in Taurus may relate to someone else, to another person, possibly someone who is quite important to you. And I think that this person is actually in quite a good position, and it's important that they make the most of this good position. And so maybe someone else needs your help. You may not be inclined to give that help. You may ask yourself, who is it, who are you to offer assistance? But I think if you can offer a bit of assistance, you will be helping someone to make the most of their potential. And it may work both ways. It may be that there is someone out there who is strongly placed, and by allying yourself with this person, your own position may actually strengthen. So do take advantage of that opportunity if you do come across it, and don't just leave people to their own devices and just assume that everything's going to be fine. Your intervention could make a big difference. Sagittarius. I think it's going to be quite an interesting day. I mean, after all, there is a full moon, and that full moon is across the main axis of your chart. After all, we've got moon in Sagittarius, and we've got moon in Sagittarius opposition the sun in Gemini. So the full moon across the main axis of your chart could have an impact on relationships. And you have to consider not just how you perceive other people, but how other people are perceiving you. You have an impact on people. The full moon is often about truth, seeing the full picture. And while it's true that you might see the full picture in terms of another person might see the full picture in terms of you. Because the person you are is now becoming very obvious. And that is for better or for worse. You know, your good traits are obvious, and so are your bad traits. It's all there. And that does mean that some people are in a position to make up their mind. So if you're involved in a one-to-one relationship, then just do realize that you're dealing with someone who is very alive and real and is thinking and feeling, and you are part of their universe, and they are considering what impact you have. And right now they can understand you a lot better than usual, and that can be a bit overwhelming to think that, because all of us are so focused on ourselves that we don't actually think that other people are judging us. And yes, they are. And I think you just need to be comfortable with that, because you judge other people and other people judge you, and that should be fine. And you should accept that. And it's possible that certain people decide that they're not someone that they decide you're not someone they want to have too much to do with, and that's okay. It happens. We can't be friends of everyone. And so do try to accept that. But at the same time as this, we have got a conjunction between Venus and Jupiter. That also has relevance for relationships, because Jupiter is your ruler and Venus is, the universal significator of relationships. And so with Venus conjunct Jupiter, that can indicate that you and someone else can get really close, and you have a chance to really understand someone for what they are, and so to benefit from their company. And I think it's probably important to live things sort of one day at a time, 1 hour at a time even, see how you and someone else can relate to one another. And I'm not just talking about romance. I might be talking about could be something to do with business. It could be a friendship. It could be just someone, I don't know, you meet on the bus and you have a 5-minute conversation with them, but that 5-minute conversation might be very significant, and then you never see that person again. So you have to, take every relationship for what it is and not look beyond the current minute. And in 5 minutes, everything can change, but who cares about what happens in 5 minutes? We're living in the present. So there is the possibility there of being really able to benefit from someone, even if that window of benefit is very, very brief. I should also say that Venus is moving into Gemini, and it happens very late, or it may happen actually tomorrow. I mean, London time, Venus moves into Gemini at around 9:30 in the evening. So if you're in Asia, Australia, New Zealand, that's something that's going to happen tomorrow. I want to talk more about that in Friday's video, but with Venus moving into Gemini, Gemini is your opposite sign, and so I think that movement into Gemini is going to make relationships more important, because you've already got the Sun in Gemini, which I think is starting to emphasize relationships, because Gemini is your opposite sign. But with Venus moving into Gemini, that's going to create more pressure in terms of how you deal with people, on a one-to-one level, and that is something that you need to bear in mind. And perhaps the full moon across the main axis of your chart is just reminding you that something is starting and something is ending in terms of certain relationships in your life. Capricorn, you possibly are not in the mood for a lot of interaction. I have been talking about the signs, and I've been talking about all the things that have been going on, like a Venus-Jupiter conjunction and a full moon, and Venus moving into Gemini, and it's all very busy, it's all very active. But I think that from your perspective, it might all be a bit too much. You're aware that it's a busy world, but do you really want to engage with it all? I think that at some level the answer might be no, because you might take the view that you have got better things to do. And I do think that some Capricorns are going to be in the mood for sort of holding back. You've done your bit. Let other people do whatever they feel they need to do, but you don't necessarily have to be involved. And the full moon today may really emphasize that. This full moon is about you, and I think it's actually quite a private full moon. When you can think about who you are, and you can perhaps work out how best to organize your life, and if things aren't working, you're going to be gently aware of it. And that might be all that needs to be said. Though I should point out that this full moon is linked with Pluto. The moon sextiles Pluto, the sun trines Pluto, and Pluto is in Aquarius. And from a Capricorn perspective, Aquarius can be a sign that has financial connotations. And so when you're alone, doing things your way, organizing your world in your own way, you might have a bit of a revelation about money. And I think that this revelation could actually be quite fortunate. You will just see what needs to be done. So if something has been bothering you financially, perhaps over the last couple of weeks, you might have a sudden realization about how you can solve the problem. It's kind of obvious, I think, but it's just something you didn't want to do, and you thought, why would you want to do that? And then suddenly you realize you can do it. And one simple transformative action can indeed make a big difference. But I really don't want to say that it's going to be a bad day. It's not a bad day. It's a day for you. It's your day. It's not anyone else's day. And I think that if you recognize the fact that it is your day, that you have complete ownership and control over the day, then things should work extremely well. And you can benefit, I think, from a conjunction between Venus and Jupiter. Now, this conjunction between Venus and Jupiter is in Taurus, and Taurus is a sign which is friendly to Capricorn. It's a Capricorn-friendly sign. And so with this Venus-Jupiter conjunction, I think that this very much focuses on what you can do. There are certain things you can't do, and you can't do it, and there's no point in trying. You can't do everything, but there's other things that you're really good at. And I think that with this Venus-Jupiter conjunction, it really does put your abilities in the spotlight, the abilities that really matter, the things that really allow you to excel. They come into the spotlight, and you realize that you can put them into action. Yes, it may take a little bit of work, but that initial realization, in a way, is quite liberating and quite hopeful, because you see you can do things that just other people can't. And I think that over the next few weeks, okay, you might have to do a little bit of work. Something needs to perhaps be practiced. You might have, because you might have got out of practice. But I think that now is your chance to put it into practice. And I think that soon enough, you will be recognized. Yeah, you'll get the recognition you deserve. So I think that is an optimistic note for the future. Aquarius. You are in, I think, quite a sociable mood. There are things going on out there, and you want to be part of it all, and you don't really want to be alone. I mean, as an Aquarius, you're quite capable of being alone if you want to be alone, but why should you be alone? And with the moon moving into Sagittarius, you're going to become more of an extrovert. Of course, I understand that extroversion and introversion are, to an extent, fixed. We are an introvert or an extrovert, but our introversion or extroversion, they can fluctuate. And I think today, you are becoming a little more outspoken. As I said, a little bit more of an extrovert. And at the same time, you may realize that there is a little bit of tension between what you want to do and what other people want to do. I mean, there are many ways in which you can be an extrovert, but you can't just be an extrovert just for the sake of it. There are certain people who are not going to be very supportive. There could be other people who are going to be extremely supportive. So if you want to mix with other people, I think it's important that you make the right choices, because some people are just not going to be helpful, and they could drag you down. And you don't want to have too busy a day, because there is a conjunction between Venus and Jupiter. And that Venus and Jupiter, although it's very fortunate, it's quite a low profile conjunction from an Aquarian perspective. And there may be some benefit in doing things at home. I think if you want to know where your luck is, where you're going to be most fortunate, I don't think it's going to be going to a party or mixing with friends. You will be most fortunate at home. most fortunate when you're handling things at home. So meetings taking place in your own space, like it may not be your own home, somewhere where you're familiar with, that's where the fortune lies. Perhaps when you're calling people, you want something from people, and you're on the phone with them, you do it from your own home, because I think it is your own home where you are most fortunate. But there is something a little bit weird about Aquarians today. I mean, Aquarians do have this reputation for being a bit strange and a bit unusual. I mean, that's supposed to be part of the charm of the sign. But you might have some thoughts about the world, and you look at the world and you're thinking, what looks good? You can see behind the apparent goodness of things and see the evil and the rot. And perhaps that's something you want to express. It's not about you personally, it's just about how you're seeing the broader environment, and you can see it. And you can see that there are some things that are in a rapid state of decay. Again, I'm not talking about you or your life. I'm talking about what you perceive out there. And you can see things in a rapid state of decay. And you might feel you want to talk about this, but at the same time you might find that other people don't want to hear. And perhaps people who don't want to listen to you, to listen to your concerns and your insights, are not really the kind of people that you should be wasting your time with. I mean, you want a certain sense of intensity and seriousness. People who will listen to your concerns might find your concerns interesting. And that might be a good test, putting people to the test. So if you tell people how bad things are and how things are in a rapid state of decay and they don't want to listen to you, then that may be a good sign that they're rather trivial people who are not really worth bothering with. But if people really engage with what you're saying and say, yeah, that's a powerful insight, and they want to hear more, then maybe those are the kind of people that you want to be spending your time with. Pisces, I think it's quite a useful day. After all, Pisces, Venus is making a conjunction to Jupiter. Jupiter is your ruler, and it's conjunct Venus. Venus and Jupiter are the two most fortunate planets in the sky. And with this conjunction between Venus and Jupiter, you yourself have a fair amount of good fortune, and I think you are going to be fortunate in the choices you make, particularly the social choices. I think you will just know which people can do you good. So, you can pick and choose. A lot of people have to pick and choose. In fact, when I've been going through the 12 signs, and for quite a few of the signs, I've been saying it's about making choices. And that partly relates to that Venus-Jupiter conjunction. You have to go where the good fortune is. Avoid the dross. And I think that with that Venus-Jupiter, you can really benefit from the right person, because that's represented by Venus. Venus is in Taurus. It's conjunct Jupiter. You're benefiting from it. And at the same time, you don't want to be dragged down. And there is this full moon. And this full moon is in Sagittarius. So the moon is in Sagittarius. So if you look at the chart from a Piscean perspective, that Sagittarius is about you getting recognition. That's what you should be looking for, recognition. getting support, getting appreciation. Moon in Sagittarius likes to make a noise, likes to be noticed, and that's what you should be moving towards. That's what you should be seeking. But it is a full moon, and so there may be other forces trying to drag you down, trying to pin you down, and those kind of forces should perhaps be resisted. And it may be, for example, that members of your family are sort of pressurizing you. They're telling you what you should do, what you shouldn't do. And if you spent too much time listening to your family, or indeed too much time giving in to the pressures of your own home, then you might miss some opportunities. And I suppose pressures from your own home, that doesn't necessarily mean anyone else is involved. You might feel that you need to spend your time at home fixing something, or dealing with some domestic issue, or making sure that some appliance works properly. Okay, if an appliance is important and has to work, it has to work. But if it's not really essential that you fix it today, but you could nonetheless find yourself wasting a lot of time in your home. So try not to spend too much time at home, because I think if you were to spend time at home, or too much time listening to members of your family, you could be missing a valuable opportunity there. And don't underestimate yourself. You have this hidden power. The moon in Sagittarius is making a sextile to Pluto, and once you're out there in the world, you can bring the power of Pluto to bear, and I think that people are going to take you seriously, and you can really explain to them what matters. And this full moon is also perhaps about the truth of the matter, and maybe it's the truth of the matter in terms of your work-family balance. People talk about this work-family balance, and very often, or what do they call it, the home-work balance, or all this kind of stuff. And very often they sort of claim that, they seem to imply, I don't want to say claim, but they seem to imply that the family side of the thing is more important than the work side of the thing somehow. But it's a balance, and I think you shouldn't think that that is always the case. It may be, at least for the purposes of today, that the work side of things is actually more important than the home side of things. At least that's what I'm suggesting. Though, with this Venus-Jupiter conjunction, I think you're going to have a clear sense of what needs to be done. I think it's very, as I said, it's very fortunate, this Venus-Jupiter conjunction. And Venus is not just about other people, it's about sort of aesthetic balance and balance in general. So where do you feel most balanced? Where do you feel like most comfortable? What is most pleasing to you? And if you go for what is most pleasing to you with that Venus-Jupiter conjunction, I don't think you'll make any mistakes. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And I want to consider today now from a perspective of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Thursday going to be like, for those watching the I Ching segment of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram 57, which is the gentle, and it seems to be a pleasant enough hexagram, but it is about having to deal with things that are somewhat negative. We could even be thinking about them in terms of disintegrating forces, things that are trying to drag us down. And indeed, there might be evil at work. And of course, evil is a somewhat strong word, but the I Ching likes to use these kind of words to just bring the thing home. And we have to work out how to deal with a rather complicated world. And there are three moving lines here. And the bottom line does indicate that we need to be actually quite decisive. We can't just do nothing. So in terms of whatever challenges we've got to deal with today, we can't do nothing. Maybe that reflects the fact we've got a full moon. The full moon is a moment of decision where we see the situation for what it is and we take firm action. And what that action is certainly, it's very disciplined. We must be very disciplined. And it may be the case that we've tried to make progress, we've done our best, but we realize that in the first instance we need to retreat. So we need to retreat to avoid defeat. That's what Greg Winkup said in his translation of I Ching. I don't think he put it exactly like that, but retreat and defeat. Yeah, we have to retreat to avoid defeat. And that's the first move. And it's not the only move, but that's how we deal with the situation to begin with. Perhaps we're take the view that these disintegrating forces are strong, and we can't just go in and just hope for the best. We've got to be very decisive, very disciplined, realize that in the first instance we haven't got the strength to deal with it, so we do retreat. But that's not the end of the matter. There are three moving lines. That's the first moving line. Then we move to the fifth line moves. And with the fifth line moving, there is an indication that we can be successful, and something we change in midweek, which of course it is midweek. In fact, the Winkup translation of the I Ching actually talks about the midweek and saying that you work on it in the midweek and you get your results by the end of the week. So it's Thursday, so that is midweek. So it's the indication here is that we do something in midweek today, and we get the results at the end of a week after 3 days. So that is something that we can do, and it seems that we are getting to grips with the situation. And so don't give up if things look overwhelming. Once you've taken decisive action, you retreat. Then we can start to sort of go back into the fray a little and make another decision. And then we are assured, or pretty much assured, that we can start to make progress by the end of a week. But then we get the top line moving. And I think that this top line is perhaps about asking too many questions. So if we are dealing with something bad, that something is rotten and evil, we might really, really want to get to the heart of the matter. But we might just get ourselves so close to this evil that it's just overwhelming. It's like poking a wasp's nest. We poke a wasp's nest, and in the end, we've suddenly got a face full of wasps, and we're in trouble. So as we get to the heart of darkness, we need to be wary and tread carefully and just not go all the way. It's perhaps enough to accept that there is a heart of darkness without having to actually confront that heart of darkness head on. Now, because we've got 3 lines moving, we get a transition, and this hexagram 57, it does move, and it moves to hexagram 11, and hexagram 11 is peace. That's not how the dog sees it, though. But now, yesterday we had hexagram 12, which is standstill. So standstill is the opposite of this. So you see this hexagram piece has got the top 3 lines are broken, the bottom 3 lines are unbroken. The hexagram standstill is the opposite. It has the top 3 lines unbroken, bottom 3 lines broken. So with standstill, it was like heaven was shutting out the earth. The earth and heaven and earth were split. The trap door on the loft had been shut. There was no escape. That heaven had shut its door on mankind. But this is the opposite. We've got heaven on earth, and earth has access to heaven, and things are moving. So it does seem that through all these travails that I was talking about with hexagram 57, which is the gentle, with all these travails, we are actually making progress, and we never really had to actually confront the heart of darkness. We could get close to it, but we could back off, and in the end things start to resolve and things start to move. So if we feel that things are overwhelming, that there are disintegrating forces, we shouldn't panic. We don't have to necessarily confront these forces. We can back off, and in the end it does seem that things will resolve. So overall, it looks today is a day when it could start off as being quite difficult, quite complicated, but in the end we will, I think, be able to take control of the situation. In fact, I don't think we even have to take control of the situation. The situation will, I think, just naturally resolve, and we will in the end find that things are pretty harmonious. And really, that's the I Ching. So I think overall it's looking pretty good in the end. And I now want to turn to the Venus-Jupiter conjunction. So we do have a Venus-Jupiter conjunction today. In theory, the Venus-Jupiter conjunction is, it's the most fortunate planet it's the most fortunate aspect in the book. And it indicates someone who, Venus-Jupiter, they are the benefics. So Jupiter is the greater benefic, Venus is the lesser benefic. So when you have Venus and Jupiter coming together, certainly in a horoscope, you supposedly have someone who is very fortunate. Luck is on their side. Whatever they touch will work well. And so if you see it in a horoscope, you've just got to be enthusiastic. And of course, Venus is the planet of relationships. So you might see it as, someone who is fortunate in relationships. Things work well for them, and they can be happy and perhaps mentally stable. Although we could say that Venus conjunct Jupiter could theoretically be a little indulgent, perhaps spending too much money. It's just a little bit too much positive. There's a little bit too much positivity there. So if you see that Venus has a financial relationship, if Venus is a planet of money, Jupiter is the planet of excess. You put them together, and you then get to a situation where you're just taking things too far, and it could be emotionally excessive. So the emotions could get out of control with Venus conjunct Jupiter, and so so I suppose in relationships, someone with Venus and Jupiter, it just could all get overwhelming. Someone, taking love too far, for example, that's one way it could work out. So you can see how Venus Jupiter might have a negative connotation. I suppose you could also look at it from a physical point of view. Venus and Jupiter could represent hormonal and glandular stuff, and sort of some organs of a body working excessively, and so there could be hormonal imbalances perhaps with Venus-Jupiter conjunction. There might also be a tendency to overweight with Venus-Jupiter conjunction. So there are a number of ways in which the Venus-Jupiter conjunction could work, but what I wanted to do was just consider a few famous people and how I think Venus-Jupiter conjunction might be working in their case. And also a famous country. I mean, let's not forget famous countries. And I suppose we can't avoid the fact that the United States has a Venus-Jupiter conjunction. So this is a chart for the Declaration of Independence, and there's a Venus-Jupiter conjunction. Venus in Cancer, Jupiter in Cancer. And also we know that there's a load of other stuff in Cancer. I think that traditionally Venus and Jupiter is about optimism. The Americans traditionally have been seen as being very optimistic. You're not supposed to be negative. I'm just looking at a book on my shelf by Barbara Ehrenreich, and it's called Bright Sided, and it's all about America's positivity and how America is, overly positive. Always think the best. Doesn't matter. It's going to be great. I go to sometimes listen to the city council meetings, and you hear the mayor of this city going on and on about how everything is wonderful, everything is great. I mean, it's quite obvious, by the way, that this city has been in decline since it was incorporated in 1996. I mean, that's the reality. This city has been Lakewood, Washington. It's been, if you look at it, its education its rankings in terms of education has been going completely collapsing for the last 6 years. That's the reality of the thing. But you go to the city council meeting, everything is great, and maybe that's a microcosm of what's happening in America. Yeah, everything is great. Biden says everything is great. The economy is under control. You go to America, it's the land of opportunity. And you could say, well, that is Venus conjunct Jupiter. But also with America, I think that Jupiter is about principle. Jupiter in Cancer. Jupiter in Cancer is about having a clear moral view about the way things should be. I think that's one of the reasons why America has been so much into regime change. The American way is the best way. American exceptionalism and American moralism, the morality of people doing things America's way. And so I think that is perhaps another dimension of that Venus conjunct Jupiter. So I thought I'd mention America's chart of the Bastille, which the French Revolution, the beginning of the French Revolution. I think this chart is important for France, even though the king wasn't got rid of on July the 14th, 1789. It is a symbolic beginning of France, of the new France. And there you have Venus-Jupiter conjunction in Leo. It's not in Cancer, it's in Leo. And perhaps with that Venus-Jupiter conjunction, Leo is all about how you look, isn't it? And maybe that Venus-Jupiter conjunction in terms of how people perceive France, people see France is all about fashion and style. I know it's a characterization, a stereotype of France, that the French are obsessed with style and fashion and the way they look. But I think perhaps to an extent that works, that Venus-Jupiter conjunction in Leo. It's also conjunct Uranus, trying to be original in terms of the way things look and style. I mean, there are other ways of looking at that Venus-Jupiter conjunction, but I didn't really want to go into too much detail about that. But those two important countries in the world are both born with a conjunction between Venus and Jupiter. So Venus and Jupiter might be about having a grand vision and being able to sort of actualize that grand vision. And one of the most successful film directors, Steven Spielberg, has a Venus-Jupiter conjunction in his chart, if this time is right, 6:19 p.m. So Steven Spielberg has the Venus-Jupiter conjunction in Scorpio, and it's in the 5th house. So the 5th house, I suppose, is very creative, film director. Venus-Jupiter in Scorpio, what does that mean for it to be in Scorpio? You could say that the water signs know what people want. They have it's not necessarily that the water signs, that Venus-Jupiter in Scorpio, is necessarily original. I mean, there are original aspects to him being a film director, but it's about knowing what people want, not intuitively, but just feeling it. You feel what your audience wants with that water sign and with the water, and so that moon in Scorpio, which appears to be difficult. Moon does not work very well in Scorpio, but perhaps when you've got Moon, Jupiter, and Venus in Scorpio, the moon is also the people. So perhaps the real key to Steven Spielberg's success as a film director is not necessarily his originality, but his natural emotional understanding about what people want and what kind of vision people want. And because that is Venus and Jupiter, isn't it? It is about that vision, people giving people something that is larger than life. Another film director who has Venus conjunct Jupiter is Roman Polanski. And here is where's Roman Polanski gone? So here's Roman Polanski's chart. And so Roman Polanski's, he has this conjunction between Venus and Jupiter in Virgo. Very, very different conjunction from a Venus-Jupiter in Scorpio. I don't know anything. I mean, I do know a little bit about Roman Polanski. I know about Rosemary's Baby. I know about Sharon Tate. I know about all his legal issues. But the Venus-Jupiter conjunction is in Virgo. So this may be someone who is very, very focused on detail. And I suppose if you want to be a film director, you do need to have a sense of detail, and maybe his sense of detail in terms of the way he creates his films is a very important part of the way he is and the way he operates. And I was thinking about, also, of course, what happened to him Firstly, the Manson murders, including his wife getting killed by his wife and unborn baby, plus the fact that all his legal travails about his sexual activity. Well, I don't want to go into the you know the details anyway. He can't go back to the US for something that happened, I think, in the 70s, and I suppose we might want to look at that Venus-Jupiter conjunction in more detail. And his Venus-Jupiter conjunction is aspecting the Neptune Hades and the Pluto North Node midpoint. Let me just show you what I mean. Let me just put up a... I just want to look at his 90-degree dial. So there's Roman Polanski's chart. So if we put, there's his Venus-Jupiter. Remember, this dial puts up, it makes conjunctions, oppositions, and squares conjunctions, and semi-squares and sesquiquadrates oppositions. So you can see that there's his Venus-Jupiter conjunction, and it's on his Neptune-Hades midpoint, and it's on his... It is actually on his Pluto node midpoint, even though that doesn't show up on the dial. So I suppose Neptune Hades, I mean, that kind of describes Neptune is about something going on in society, and Hades is a darkness in there. So he's really picking up on that Neptune Hades. Now you could say, with Venus-Jupiter on a Neptune-Hades midpoint, that may say something about Rosemary's Baby. So Rosemary's Baby is, if I remember rightly, is a story of a couple who, they've got financial issues, and so the husband does a deal in which the devil becomes the child's father. Isn't that how it works? And if you've seen the film, you know the story. And so that would be Venus-Jupiter on the Neptune Hades midpoint. That might be maybe have been reflected in his film, but it might also have been reflected in reality. Venus-Jupiter is the marriage, his marriage to Sharon Tate, and what happened to it, and how it ended. And Venus-Jupiter on the Pluto node midpoint, and Pluto node midpoint is a tragic destiny of a group of people. Ebertin says large group of people. So his Venus-Jupiter conjunction may have been somewhat damaged by that, and maybe that's how it worked out. And he was actually married to he married Sharon Tate on January the 20th, 1968. And this is a chart of his marriage. I don't know what time. I'm assuming it was in London. I'd gone for about noon. And the marriage chart, there was a Moon Uranus conjunction at the time of the marriage, and if you look at his transits, so there is his Venus-Jupiter conjunction in 25-26 Virgo, and on the day of his marriage, Chiron was at 26 degrees 10 Pisces. So Chiron was opposition his Venus on pretty close to the day he was married. And maybe that Chiron opposition his Venus was foreshadowed what happened to Sharon Tate and how the marriage actually ended. Also in the marriage chart, here's the marriage chart, going back to the marriage chart. Venus, very important to consider Venus in a marriage chart, was square there's Mars, the Mars-Saturn midpoint was at around 22 Pisces. So Venus was square the Mars-Saturn midpoint on the day he got married. And I suppose you could say, well, that is a death of the spouse, or death of the woman. Venus on at square Mars-Saturn, a dead woman, unfortunately. So that perhaps is something to take note of. Do consider marriage charts and what's going on during marriage charts. It's not the only thing to consider before people get married, but if you spend money on the flowers, you should perhaps spend money on an astrologer as well. Another person who has Venus-Jupiter conjunction, who we don't hear very much about him, is Uri Geller. Do you remember Uri Geller? So Uri Geller was a famous, I mean, still a famous psychic, but I remember in the 1970s, Uri Geller was, he was all over the place, and he was famous for bending spoons. So people would watch Uri Geller on television, and now I'll tell you what's going on here. You're wondering why the dog is barking. Now I can see a deer out of a window. So right now there's a deer walking around out of a window, and the dog is watching the deer and is going completely hysterical. So that is why the dog is barking. I thought I'd let you know. So going back to Uri Geller. So Uri Geller had he was able to bend spoons apparently through the power of his mind, and people would watch Uri Geller on television, and I think they would then claim that they would have a drawer of cutlery that was sort of completely broken up, and so that's Uri Geller. And so he had a Venus-Jupiter conjunction, and there it is. He had Jupiter at 18 Scorpio, Moon at 19 Scorpio, Venus at 19 Scorpio. And so I think that this Venus-Jupiter, Moon, Venus-Jupiter, Scorpio in Scorpio certainly made him very charismatic. I mean, he was a really big deal. And so that must have helped him in terms of how he built up his career as a psychic. I'm not going to make any suggestions about the actual validity of his actions. You probably have your own view, but I suppose Venus, Jupiter in Scorpio, you could see Scorpio as being like mind over matter, the sort of desire, the force of the mind being able to control things. And so that might be how the Venus-Jupiter conjunction is actually working. And yes, it is conjunct the moon. So maybe that's how it's working with Uri Geller. Victoria Beckam. I've talked about Victoria Beckam before, and Victoria Beckam has a Venus-Jupiter conjunction. So there is no doubt that Victoria Beckam is incredibly successful. So she was successful with the Spice Girls, and then she married David Beckham, and after that, she's in, I don't know what she's into. She's into sort of fashion and everything else. So she's regarded as being a super successful woman, and she has a Venus-Jupiter conjunction, and it's a really nice Venus-Jupiter conjunction. I don't have a time of birth, by the way, but that Venus-Jupiter conjunction is in Pisces. And so you've got Jupiter's in Pisces, which is in the sign, which is its sign of its rulership, and you've got Venus in Pisces, which is the sign of its exaltation. So with Venus-Jupiter conjunction, that does make her incredibly fortunate, just as a person. I mean, it's great having a Venus-Jupiter conjunction in Pisces. And so, indeed, she has become really successful. And I think you would attribute a lot of that to her Venus-Jupiter conjunction. By the way, Venus and Jupiter are the benefics, whereas Mars-Saturn are the malefics. And so with that Mars-Saturn conjunction, she's got a conjunction with Mars and Saturn. So why is it that she's benefiting from a Venus-Jupiter conjunction, but she's not suffering because of a Mars-Saturn conjunction? So that's really quite interesting. And I suppose the Mars-Saturn, she does come over as being sort of quite standoffish, and she does come over as quite a Mars-Saturn kind of person, but maybe that's helped her, this sort of aloof, posh spice as she used to be with Mars-Saturn, with the Mars-Saturn conjunction, might be how this actually works. And so maybe she's actually been able to harness the Mars-Saturn conjunction to her benefit. And it is, so I don't know, that is an interesting chart. Now, another person who I think has a Venus-Jupiter conjunction in Pisces is the supreme leader of Iran. So let's have a look at his Ali Khamenei. So, when the president of Iran died, and so let's find Ali Khamenei's chart. So there is Ali Khamenei's chart. He's the supreme leader of Iran, and he's born April the 19th, 1939, and you can see his Venus-Jupiter conjunction in Pisces. So he's got the same Venus-Jupiter conjunction as Posh Spice, as Victoria Beckam. How does that work? I mean, he was never a Spice Girl. He didn't marry Victoria Beckam. Sorry, he didn't marry David Beckham. How does that work? Well, we have to remember that the Venus-Jupiter conjunction can work in different ways, and it's a strong Jupiter. Jupiter is a planet of religion. Jupiter in Pisces having strong religious beliefs, and Jupiter in Pisces Jupiter in Pisces is about having real principles about the way things should be done. Very moral Venus in Pisces. Jupiter in Pisces. I don't know how moral Victoria Beckam is, but maybe her Jupiter was manifesting in a different way. So for a religious leader, having a Jupiter in Pisces, that works very well. And so Venus conjunct Jupiter, I suppose, maybe allows him to network all the people he needs to be in touch with in order to be the supreme leader of Iran. And that Venus-Jupiter conjunction is opposition Neptune in Virgo. So Neptune in Virgo, that may tell us something about his religion. Neptune doesn't really work very well in Virgo, does it? Neptune is supposed to be about transcendence. But how can you transcend in Virgo when you're just focusing on all these little details? Well, you can't wear this, you shouldn't drink, women should cover their heads, and you're trying to work out some kind of broad religious view, the universe, yet you're focusing on all these little mundane details about how people should behave. Maybe that's how Neptune in Virgo is working for him. And so we bring that together, Venus-Jupiter conjunction, opposition Neptune in Virgo. And yeah, he's religious, Jupiter opposition Neptune, but there is a bit of a problem there, as I've just explained. Okay, so Ukraine. Ukraine has a Venus-Jupiter conjunction. There it is. Venus-Jupiter conjunction. So Jupiter is at Jupiter's at 25, 58 Leo. Venus is at 28,9 Leo. So that would mean that that the midpoint would be at about 27. So if there's Mercury is on the Venus-Jupiter midpoint as well. So you could say, oh, well, this is a fortunate country because it's got Venus-Jupiter conjunction. Well, it does, and it's fairly close to Regulus, the royal star. Well, a couple of points about this. I think that Ukraine, when it declared its independence, has Capricorn rising. So from a whole sign perspective, that Venus-Jupiter conjunction would be in the 8th house. And I think from a Placidus perspective, it is a very 8th house Venus-Jupiter conjunction. That's the first point. And I also think that Venus-Jupiter conjunction is moderated by Mercury. So if you actually listen to the stuff that comes out of Ukraine, the propaganda and the PR, there's Mercury on a Venus-Jupiter midpoint. Overly positive view of until recently about the way the war was going. Zelensky, I think about a month ago, he said that 31,000 Ukrainian troops had been killed, or the actual figure is something like 500,000 or 600,000 have been killed or wounded. So that's just not true, and so there's overly optimistic view about the way things should be going. Maybe that's partly how that Venus-Jupiter conjunction is working. It's just a bit. Venus-Jupiter also wants loads of stuff. Jupiter is, there's something excessive about Ukraine. Sort of making huge demands on the West and NATO for all the stuff it wants. And I wonder if Venus-Jupiter conjunction is it's about money, and so here's a country that wants money. Venus-Jupiter conjunction is about money. We want money. This is a country where we want to get rich, and so that might mean that if you have the opportunity and you're living in a country with Venus-Jupiter conjunction, you will take any opportunity to enrich yourself. So, for example, when you have the Russian invasion of Kharkov, the Kharkov province over the last couple of weeks, there was concerns that the Ukrainian defences weren't good enough, that the Russians were able to just roll over them very quickly. And this was in spite of the fact that a lot of money had been given over to build defences in Kharkov, in the Kharkov region. And apparently what had happened is that the money had been given to contractors, and the money had been literally sort of pocketed, and so maybe that's how we're seeing some of the corruption with Venus conjunct Jupiter, because everyone wants to be rich if they have the opportunity, and maybe this is particularly true in Ukraine. I understand that Russia is corrupt, but I think Ukraine is actually even more corrupt by maybe quite a long shot, and so you can see all this money coming from the West goes to Ukraine, but a lot of it just gets siphoned off. And there was even stories that some weapons that had been sent to Ukraine ended up with the Mexican cartels. I don't know how that worked, but also Venus in Ukraine's chart is aspecting the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So there is. I think it's a square. I think, the Venus, Jupiter is not on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, but the Venus is on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And so having Venus on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, remember we just looked at Roman Polanski's wedding to Sharon Tate had Venus on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And so Ukraine's independence had a similarity between, Roman Polanski's wedding to Sharon Tate And this is the result. We're seeing the result. And so, just because you've got Venus-Jupiter conjunction in a chart doesn't always mean that it works well. Another chart, the Wall Street crash, October the 9th, 1929. I mean, I talked about that yesterday because we had Jupiter moved into Gemini that year, and I was linking the Wall Street crash with this, and the Wall Street crash should not have had, I don't know, Wall Street crash actually shouldn't be there. Wall Street crash does not have a Venus-Jupiter conjunction. My apologies, that should not be there. So I think I will move to my final chart, which is Robert Oppenheimer. I mean, wasn't there a film about Robert Oppenheimer just came out recently? And Robert Oppenheimer, there is his Venus-Jupiter conjunction. He also has Uranus on descendant. I suppose you could see angular Uranus. You could link that with the atomic bomb. But I'm particularly thinking about that Venus-Jupiter conjunction. And, okay, Robert Oppenheimer was successful, you could say. He was a successful scientist. He sorted out the Manhattan Project. He sorted out an atomic bomb for America. Okay, you could say that afterwards he fell out. He had his doubts about the atomic bomb, and he fell from grace, got his security clearance removed. But you could say, with Venus-Jupiter in conjunction Aries, here is someone who is a leader. He was able to lead the Manhattan Project and to a successful conclusion. That's how his Venus-Jupiter conjunction worked. But I think it would be useful to get some more information about the Venus-Jupiter conjunction. And in Robert Oppenheimer's case, we might want to consider what midpoints his Venus-Jupiter conjunction is on. And there is one key midpoint that his Venus-Jupiter conjunction is on. And this may give us some indication about how we should look at Venus-Jupiter conjunctions. And if we just so let's just where's his Venus-Jupiter? There's his Venus-Jupiter conjunction. And what I'm interested in here is he's got Venus-Jupiter. Both Venus and Jupiter are on his Mars-Hades midpoint. So Hades is a planet, the planet of destruction. What is grim? And I think you can associate the work he was working on as being Hades. Radioactivity, pollution, mass death. Mars is an aggressive planet, so you put Mars Hades together and you get mass destruction. And so he had Jupiter and Venus on the Mars Hades midpoint. And if we turn to Alfred Witter, see if he says anything useful about it. So Mars Hades is the principle of sudden attacks, murder, homicide, unusual death, atrocity. So Jupiter on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, it says bad results of work, killing, sentence, capital punishment, quick, unusual death. I think the bad results of work, this is the results of his work. And you could say, if you have a problem with nuclear weapons, that you could say that the results of his work were bad. I think that Witter has simplified that. It's too simple, that. I think Mars Hades as a principle is about violence, war, mass destruction. And that's his Jupiter. That was his life's work, creating this destruction. Okay, it might not have felt like his life's work to begin with, but that was the culmination of his work, was the detonation of the first atomic bomb. And so that may be how his Venus-Jupiter conjunction was working, or at least part of the way his Venus-Jupiter conjunction was working. And that is it. That's all I'm going to say on the subject of the Mars-Jupiter and the Mars-Jupiter conjunction. I'm really sorry about all the noise. There's not really much I could do about it. We had, there was a kettle. I mean, I know people noticed the kettle in the past, but the kettle was particularly excessive today. Maybe this is a build-up to the full moon. Plus the dog. Well, as I said, there was a deer. I was looking at the deer, and the dog was driven crazy by the deer, and so I couldn't do anything about that. So my apologies about that, but I suppose at least it's real, isn't it? This is the way it is. Dogs, kettle. I mean, that's what life is all about, isn't it? Okay, so thanks again for. Well, if you got through it, I mean, maybe the dog and the kettle scared you off. You just couldn't stand it anymore. But if you reach this point, thank you very much for bearing with me. And if you did happen to enjoy the video and you weren't too bothered by the deer and by the dog and the kettle, then I would be very grateful if you were to like this video. And if you're not subscribed and you enjoyed the video, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thanks again for listening, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.